Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Hello and welcome to the Healing Generations podcast. My name is Alejandro Berens-Osuna and I will be one of the hosts for today's segment. We first wanted to start off with thanking all the listeners for your continued support and for tuning in as we explore what healing means for today's generation, for what healing looks like for the youth. Today we are excited about our guest and can't wait to dive into it. But first, let me pass the palabra over to my co-host Ariel, who will be guiding today's conversation.
Thank you, AB. Always pleasure to be in space with you. And today, I'm actually a little bit more excited because we're going to be able to share some space with Fabian Rodriguez. So Fabian, before I get a chance to introduce you, I did want to mention that I've had the privilege of being in various spaces with you. I've met you at the Hombres de Tiro. I've been able to sit in trainings with you, Joven Noble, and a lot of different spaces. So I'm excited that we get to hear from you and that our listeners get to hear a little bit of your story. So let's just go ahead and just dive in. For us, Fabian, it's always our tradition to get to know each other before we dive into any conversation. So I don't know if you want to, share a little bit about yourself, a little conocimiento. Who is Fabian? Who do you represent and who you're connected to?
Thank you, Ariel. It's a pleasure to be on here. And I'm glad you invited me even after all the rescheduling we had to do. My name is Fabian Olin Rodriguez. I live in Napomo and my father is Cuco Refugio Rodriguez. My mother is Nelda Olvera. Sisters Yasmin Metzli Rodriguez. I have roots over in Zacatecas and in Matamoros. I believe specifically for Zacatecas, it's Moyawa, small little rural town where my dad and my grandfather were from. Ramon Rodriguez and Maria Rodriguez. And on my Olveras, it was Pedro Olvera and Juanita Olvera. I'd say I hope to have a decent understanding about where I am, who I'm from, where I've been, and that sort of thing. And just about what I'm going to do here, not just in the podcast, but in general. What do I do with myself in terms of what I have to offer and such. So yeah, I represent both those lines. I represent a lot of hard work and kind of being the fruit of all that labor. And I can't exactly forget that. I refuse to. So it's a bit of who I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering, letting us get to know you a little bit, and letting the audience get to know you a little bit more. Obviously, conocimiento is how we start everything. It's how we start our meetings, Círculo. And I know you were involved with Círculo, so I want to ask you a little bit more about that. How did, you first get connected? How did that happen for you?
So the story of my involvement in Círculo has been, I think it's pretty funny. So my parents have both been involved in Círculo for a while, particularly my dad. I think the duration of their marriage is about the duration that my father's been involved. So for quite a long time, I've heard about it. And I've always wondered, why is Papi leaving for a whole weekend? And he's not leaving for work. Well, why is he leaving? And I think on occasion, my mother would go to pick him up. And I would get to see, San Juan Bautista and go to Jolon. And eventually, I talked to Papa Bear, or Isaac Cardenas, as the wider world would know him. And I asked him at a very young age, I'm if I could go. And in usual fashion, because at the time he was talking to a child, so it makes total sense. Mijo, wait till next year and I will answer that question. Now, little did Papa Bear know that this was his biggest mistake, because I then branded that moment into my mind and waited for the next year. And at 10 years of age, I was allowed to go to Jolon. I was given permission. Everybody said it was okay. And I was just very excited to be there before I actually knew how to operate things and how everything worked and about haciendo todo and trying to figure it all out. Like that's where I am now.
Hmm.
Is just trying to get a better grasp of what everybody else is doing and what I can do in the meantime.
Thank you for that story. And that's very much Papa Bear right there for you. He answers your question without answering your question, but always leaving you in suspense.
Correct.
So so that's Papa Bear. And that's the gift and the medicine that he carries, right? But thinking about that experience, because I know since then you've been able to participate in a lot of different spaces that are healing centered, right? But I want to focus on what you mentioned in terms of the Hombres de Tiro. How was it from asking to attend to then your first time attending? And how was it just being connected to the Hombres de Tiro now? Like, can you speak a little bit about those experiences?
Well, I can't exactly go into what happens at Holon without first happening about what goes on with the sweat in particular, and a lot of other like finer pieces of ceremonia. Um, there are a whole bunch of teachings that happen at Holon, and a lot of different ways and practice, and everybody tries to be respectful of what everyone brings to the table.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, I could be wrong on this, but so bear with me. The main practice that I am familiar with is Shumash, and that is because of a woman known as Maestra Adelina.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was much younger, my father learned a lot about this and about Círculo and Ceremonia from her. And as I was, just a little kid, I would occasionally tag along on stuff like that. At one point, I was like 3, 4 years old, and I went into the sweat, and I didn't last 5 minutes. I stuck my head out the bottom, out the back, which was very unconventional. But I grew up with this, washed in it, per se. And that's why I felt so compelled and connected to it later.
Mm.
So the actual experience I had at Holon and going there was much easier to adapt to. And it was very normal for the most part. Whereas a lot of newcomers that are, already adults, they have their jobs, they have their lives, it can be jarring. It will most likely be jarring if they are not like fully talked through about what's going to happen or what they're going to see or what they're going to experience. It's going to throw them through a loop. I did not get that. I simply was there. I paid attention and I listened. And I really always cherish the pieces of information and the lessons I've gotten from that, because it's always been very helpful to me one way or another.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear about the Hombres de Retiro, I always feel like it's like Vegas, because my dad's always like, I can't tell you what happens in Retiro. What happens there stays there. It's like a, secret club. So I never really get to hear about people's like moments in Retiro. And I know a lot of healing and a lot of happiness, grief, tears comes from Retiro. And I feel like you kind of already answered some of our next questions in the sense of, what was really memorable for you? What's an experience you want to talk about? So for me, it's what lesson from Retiro did you take away from it? Every year you go, because I know you've gone multiple times. And was it different back then than it is now, this last year that we just did it right now?
So, particularly the Círculo en Holon, in regards to it being different then versus now, yes. Is that a bad thing? No. There's been an adjustment so that way some of the elders that were initially trying to be in charge of everything and facilitating all of the happenings of each day of the weekend are there just to reflect on what they bring to Círculo for their own healing, and let everybody that they've been teaching for the past 2 decades go from there. And to just be succinct about it, that they all have been doing a good job trading off. And in regards to Holon, they've been upkeeping it. Particularly Mario, as you both well know, has done a lot of facilitation in Holon. And I feel very confident in having him lead. And as for the memories of actually just being there are a lot of moments that I remember that were very like impactful. One of the earliest things I remember was at some point at the end of the weekend to summarize everything that he had heard and listened to. Mr. Macedonio had basically written like a skit, like a comedy piece for the third day. And I have the worst laugh because not just because it's loud, but because it goes on forever and it goes off for no reason. So when a man that funny was talking about just hilarious content that related to that weekend and related to what people said and the jokes that were told, it was like I was sore. I was sore with laughter. I was on the floor. It was so funny to me at the time, and it's still amusing even now. But it's moments like that that kind of help me realize that. And then there's just a couple other smaller moments of like irony that I guess you put together when you go to Holon, is that specifically whenever people are talking about like hesitation or regret, or they're talking about doing something that's like maybe not in their own best interest,
Mm-hmm.
and then through divine whatever and nature, or simply their own like lack of perception of what's around them, that environment will remind them
Mm-hmm.
of something. That someone will drop something unexpectedly, a thing will break that is better off broken, these sorts of things that are kind of difficult to explain outside of Circulo, but make most sense when you're there to see it. And I always like those little moments, not because I'm going to remember all of them, but because I'm going to remember the feeling of, oh, I'm kind of glad this happened. Thank you, whatever is out there that is doing this, because it's a good sense of humor for the universe to have, but it's also a good lesson. It's not the wind and like leaves aren't telling you like finalize this paperwork or do this or go for that promotion or quien sabe qué. It's presenting you with stuff you already know. I'm just reminding you. You know this. This is nothing new. This is nothing harmful. This is what is. And I'm reminding you.
No, I agree with that too. And I think, just going back to some of the things that you mentioned, because you mentioned one of my biggest mentors, Mario, right? And I think you also mentioned Macedonio, who, for the record, if you ever think of there's healing in laughter, that's who I think of. Because he has a way of weaving you through a story that has moments of just deepness, moments of pain, moments of darkness, and then moments of just pure laughter to the point that you're sore tomorrow. So the fact when you said that, that was like, okay, that's who came to my mind. So let me ask you another question. Thinking about all those people that you've been able to sit in circle with, all the different maestros and maestras that you're connected to, because, we talk a lot about healing. What is healing? Who's on this healing journey with you? Everything is really about healing. So when you think about that journey for yourself, who is the person that walked with you in your healing journey that you're like, that's the one that I lean on. That's the person that I go to. That's the person that has been walking with me. Who comes to your mind?
For my own healing journey, man, that's a hard question.
No pressure, just one person. And don't say Kuko. Don't say your dad. I know your dad's been with you at every
I'm
circle.
Deliberately not picking him because he already gets too much limelight. So I know my camera's not on, but my hair is the same length. I put on a hat one time and I looked at my shadow and I took it off because I didn't want to see it because it looked too familiar.
I would assume, obviously I didn't know Kuko back when he was younger, right? But I would assume when I see you, that's what he looked like because of the hair and because of the stilo, everything, right? When we were in Santa Barbara and I got a chance to share space with you, that's what I'm like, if I ever met Kuko at a younger stage, that's what he would look like. But no, thinking about who walked with you in that journey, who comes to mind?
The one person I know who walked with me for a bit of my healing journey and then just kind of give me a push, and then I did it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Was my buddy JP Flores, Juan Pablo Flores. He died about a year ago, of a heart condition that he didn't tell anybody about. He also knew a lot about ceremony and about sitting in Circulo with other men. He was much older than I thought he was. He was like in his 40s, and I thought he was like an older 29, you know? He had been in and out of the prison system for a good while, and then he kind of stood on the line between church faith and ceremony, which I thought was a very interesting thing. And he kept those two worlds separate, which was also very deliberate, I feel. And he got a lot of benefit from both. He went to Presbyterian Church in Cambria, and there is kind of where he got his pick me up to go back into the world and go to community college, which is where I met him. And I detailed a lot of like the fact that my mental health was just so terrible at that point around the time I met him. And he kind of just like watched me deteriorate a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried not to let myself do that, but I mean, circumstance just did that. And then up to the day that I realized that he passed away and, went to his services and then so on, I kind of had to make adjustments to myself and to what I was doing. So I dropped out of my classes. I left Hancock. I just took a breather for about a year before I decided to go to Hancock College in the spring, which is a community college much closer to where I live. And it's so far, it's had much better resources than what I had.
Mm.
And so he watched a lot of that. And if he were still here, he would have seen that, seen where I am now.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a big thank you for opening up and sharing that story. I really connected to a lot you said, especially towards the end, because it's something I'm dealing with right now, with the idea of wishing someone who's gone could see who I am today, and really struggling with the fact that they're never going to be able to, but also having to come to terms with, no, they are seeing it just from a different perspective now. So I really want to give you a big thank you for sharing and opening up and, just being vulnerable with us. I think that's something that's hard to do, especially when, there's all these people that are going to be listening to the podcast. So just a really big thank you. Our next question kind of goes into what you were already saying about the struggle, And I wonder for you if there's any advice you could have given your younger self or yourself even going through that time. What's something you would say to yourself when you were struggling or when you were feeling down?
To be fair, what is wrong with you? Like, I'm sorry if that's rough, and I know we just had a touchy moment about those that passed, but I genuinely disagree with who I used to be. So I'm gonna have like a football style pep talk with one person, and that's me in like junior year. I don't have any sympathy for what I used to think because it was wrong, without going into too much detail. And me in that time frame did a lot of wrong to people that I thought I was friends with. So a lot of it is just, okay, I'm gonna do the thing I said I wasn't. I'm gonna cite my dad. He always said a quote that he pulled from Circulo that somebody else said. Mr. Smith went to church every Sunday, but he went to hell for what he did on Monday. It doesn't mean anything if I go to Circulo and I don't apply anything I said. I don't follow through with anything. I was still stagnant in the latter part of high school. And I made all these effectively fake promises to myself in front of Circulo at that time. And a lot of it is just like, you have to follow through with your word. It's palabra for a reason. And a lot of what you did is permanent. Like, you can make mistakes. Everybody does. Nobody's exempt from it. If you think you are, how dare you? But they all have consequences. And however fixable that is, doesn't care whether or not you're capable of fixing it.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just, you can't be sorry for yourself. you need to shape up, and you need to follow through with what you're saying. Better yet, understand what you're saying before you say it, because that's the worst offender.
Damn, I need you in my life to bring a little bit of
Yeah.
structure to me. No, but I think, if I could touch on one thing that you said, right? In terms of like, it doesn't matter if you go to church or you're in ceremony on Sunday. If those values don't go home with you, then you're not doing yourself any good, right? Because one of the biggest things that I learned through my mentors and my maestros, that your community starts at home. And if you're not able to live those values inside your house with integrity, like doing the right thing when no one else is looking, then those values are no good to you. Right? So let me ask you this, Fabian, I know you've been in Círculo many a times. You've come back year after year. You've been able to sit in circle with a lot of great maestros that you've even, quoted now, right? You quoted the Maestro Montoyas, the Papa Bears, the Macedonios. They often share a lot of values that transcend beyond the circle, and you're really able to take them home. What is one value that you want to make sure that you live by going into the future?
The value I would pick would be respecting boundaries and asking about them always.
Mhm.
You can never ask too many questions about a boundary and who it applies to, because if you don't ask enough questions, you could breach it, violate it, whatever, and not realize.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, you're not always guaranteed that person telling you. It would be nice and it would be good for them to do that, but it doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to re-ask and reassure everything. If you ever have a moment of doubt, like, is this kind of in a gray area, quote unquote?
Mm.
Let me ask if it is or isn't. So that's what I would take away, because that's what I built upon as the years have gone by.
I really agree with what you're saying about boundaries being so important. And for me, it personally goes into a whole noble teaching that there is about in la quech, and that is, like what you put in is what you're going to receive. And don't ask anyone to do anything you're not willing to do, which is like one of the lessons that I try to live every day of my life, even if it's a big old struggle. So I really want to thank you for sharing. Our next question is one of my favorite questions, and me and Ariel have been arguing over this question this whole podcast because he keeps trying to steal it from me. And the question is, if you had a microphone and you're on a stage and this microphone can talk to anyone in the world, what is one issue that you would like to lift up?
Man.
No pressure.
All right. Get everything checked out, from physical health to mental health, and particularly with the men in your life. Women have far more support that is great for them, and I do not want to disparage what they have. Men don't have a lot in regards to support. This is why Círculo is a thing. This is why Ceremonia is a thing. It helps for those who want that help, who choose to drive 4 hours out, take a flight out to go sit in a circle with a bunch of other guys and deal with themselves. Mental health supports, therapy, and even like physical, like annual checkups to see if you have like any kind of underlying diseases, cancers, so on, are very important to go get checked out, especially if it's like in your family history. If you have a history of diabetes, if you have a history of certain types of cancer, if you have a history of certain mental disorders that have been prevalent in like your cousins or your uncles or your aunts and siblings, like that's something you should look into. And of course, this is for everybody, but also for the men that don't regularly do this, where it hasn't been commonplace, where it historically has never been done. Like their grandfather never did it, their father never did it, they themselves have never done it. Now is the time to do it, to deal with yourself and to go get anything checked out.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, right? Before it's too late, because I think many of times you're right. At least I'm gonna speak for myself. The men in my life don't know how to ask for help, and the men in my life don't know how to get themselves checked mentally, physically, emotionally, every aspect of it. So I think that's 100% true. And I think that's also a good message for the next generation, because we've never been taught on how to do that, right? Like we give and give until it hurts, and then we give some more. And that's just how we've been able to function. And that's a beautiful teaching. Now, a follow up to that, in addition to that, is there any additional teachings that you would want to give the next generation? Like if you're talking to little siblings, if you're talking to future kids, if you're talking to future family, what is another advice that you would want to give to that next generation? Apart from making sure you take care of yourself, making sure you get checkups, making sure that you're leaning on the people that you love.
To younger people, to people younger than me, a lot of it is figure things out for yourself, as in don't let other people think for you. That doesn't mean like struggle alone. It means think for yourself. Don't let other people think for you. Don't think on behalf of other people. Think for yourself. Or if you're ever going to think for somebody else, it is because you're both in agreement about something and you both know that. You have a right to do whatever you want, think whatever you want within reason. Don't be stupid. But
now there's a teaching.
Yeah. Don't be stupid, but don't underestimate yourself. Don't undercut it. Be reasonable, as vague as that is, when it comes to making any kind of decision that might have its ripple effect. Just be conscious. Do I want to start drinking alcohol at age 19? Sure. No. Yes, behind my parents' back. No. That, like a bunch of different answers that you could give to that. What sounds correct, and what sounds correct that where it's not sounding stupid?
Yeah. Sounding is one thing, but I think, your actions are equally important. So I think, both of those are valid. Because even the example that you gave, right? I think if somebody's listening to this podcast and you say drinking at 19, some people will be like, damn, you're not 21. Why are you drinking? And other people are going to be like, 19? Why'd you wait so long? Like I started drinking at 14. Right. So you have different people from different walks of life that have different struggles and different obstacles. So it's you're going to get a little bit of everything. Right. So one thing is sounding stupid and another thing is acting. Right. So I think sounding and acting are two different things. But I appreciate that. And I also, just appreciate you with the wisdom that you come into these spaces and being willing to offer perspectives. Right. Because I could have asked you a question of what's the advice you have for the next generation. And it could have been like, love yourself. It could have been take care of yourself. But you said, no, I'm going to take it to the next level and I'm going to be a little philosophical. And hey, these are your two realities, which way you want to go down. So, as we kind of close up the podcast, and I am going to put you on blast in a little bit, but not just yet, in a little bit. But I want to give us an opportunity to close up in a good way. So I'll pass it over to AB first to see if there's any closing remarks that you have in terms of what has been shared today, in terms of what you want to offer up. And then I want to pass it back to Fabian to see if you have any closing remarks. And then I am going to ask you for a favor, Fabian. So be ready.
I just want to give you a big thank you. I know this podcast did not want to happen, so I'm so happy it finally happened. Poor Emilio's been going through it with us. Thank you so much for your patience. But no, just a really big thank you for tuning in, being your authentic self and really just opening up with us. Big thank you to you. Always a big thank you to our listeners for tuning in. I can't believe that we've been doing this podcast for this long. I was just thinking about that earlier today. Like, me and Ariel have been doing this for a while now. So grateful for you all for always tuning in. And as always, a thank you to my amazing co-host, Ariel Jimenez, for doing these with me.
Thank you, Fabian. Any closing remarks? Anything you want to leave us off with?
We did it. It finally went through schedule-wise. Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. This has been a strange but welcome experience to sit on a podcast like this. Because I've never done this before. I've recorded podcasts by myself, but that was in 2020, so it was a little sad. But this is much better. This is different. And I appreciate the structure and the work that all three of you are doing.
Thank you. No, thank you for that. And thank you for your wisdom too. like I said, I know I've been able to share spaces with you on a lot of different levels, and I'm always impressed by the way that you show up. Now, before we close out, I do want to thank our listeners for the continued support, for always tuning in, for passing around the palabra the way that you all do, and just passing around the stories. I think there's a lot of healing through stories. What they're also healing through is a lot of different art forms. There's healing through poetry. There's healing through painting. There's healing through, guitar. So what I said, where I was going to ask Fabian for a favor, is I've heard him recite some beautiful poetry. I've heard him recite Maestro Montoya's poem. I've heard him recite his own poetry. So as a way to closing us out, Fabian, if you don't mind, maybe picking the one that resonates to you the most, and maybe we could close up with you sharing one of those pieces, if that's okay with you.
All right. I'll go get the book. I got a list to pick from. Give me a sec.
I know you do.
20 Years of Joda. Jose Montoya. No, I'm not reading the whole book. Just cracking it open, and I cracked it open at a really good page.
Go for it.
Okay. Don't ever lose your driver's license. Greyhound riding. Lonesome blues. Not to mention the turmoil and despair of the terminals. Pimps and pushers and frightening grandmas. Refugees from middle America and sadistic cops. And you ride side by side, old people going on their last journeys and young people on their way to new adventures and dreams, leaving their burdens to the mountain, and eventually vice versa. And the dreams seem nearer as huge, smiling billboards proclaim a grand America out there, somewhere. As the gloom rolls on, always futuristic freeways, modern long knives, slicers of old barrios. And finally, having left the driving to insulting drivers, a static voice crackles a thank you for going Greyhound. And you feel grateful in a hateful sort of way, knowing you've been taken for a ride, side by side, old people going on their final journeys.
Thank you for that. I know you
don't lose your driver's license.
Don't lose your driver's license. I know you have a special connection with Maestro Montoya. So for me, when you read that poetry, when you read that book, it always grounds me a little bit. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah. This is a copy that I believe Mario gave me. Mario or HSF, one of the two, had gifted me another copy because my parents had like their house copy.
Mm-hmm.
But I've actually read this like a couple of these poems, El Louis, Derelict Dogs, Moco Poem, Billy Billy Bilitante, all these other ones that have just been shoved in here, and some of them have been given songs if you find the recordings. But yeah, this has been very intertwined in my life, and I think Jose Montoya and Adelina were probably the two like base components that led me to getting into all this.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I can't wait to hear more of your poetry and to be in other spaces with you. So thank you for that, and thank you, AB, for always hosting us. Emilio, thank you for always handling this in the most gentle way possible. And to our listeners, we'll connect with you all soon.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.